May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always pleasing to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. We live in a culture that values fairness and that values a justice that often means getting even. When someone has wronged us, we want restitution, an eye for an eye. And then we make heroes out of those who get revenge, who fight for fairness no matter the cost. I was thinking back, I think that's what the whole Western genre and John Wayne and all of the big tough guys in the Western genre were about. And that's what superhero stories are about today. When we were kids, they were comic books, and today it's a multi-billion-dollar film industry. And the standard setup for a superhero story is that they have some kind of power, some superpower, some capacity or spatial ability to get even. And so we have Superman and Spider-Man and Iron Man and Thor with their abilities. But they're not all men. We also have Captain Marvel and Supergirl and Storm and Black Widow. They're mostly men, though, I got to say. I had to do a special search to find a bunch of female superheroes. They're out there, but the main list, the first list that came up was very male. So anyway, they have superpowers that allow them to catch bad guys and overcome evil and outfight the villain. But it's not just the superhero genre. You know, I've talked about this before. We love movies where somebody gets even in a really satisfying way, that gets revenge. There's an entire franchise of movies with Keanu Reeves playing this fellow named John Wick. And I'm not sure exactly what his story is, but he's just a really dangerous guy. And someone kills his dog, and it just sets him off. And to get revenge, he goes and kills 77 people. So in the first John Wick movie, there are 77 people and one dog killed. But that was so successful, they made a second John Wick movie. And in the second movie, 128 people are killed by John Wick. In the third movie, he tones it down a little bit and only kills 98 people. And then in the fourth movie, he goes for gusto and kills 151 people. So in this movie franchise, this very successful movie franchise, we have 454 people killed and one dog. Now, why do we enjoy revenge so much? What is driving this urge for revenge and getting even? Well, Peter comes to Jesus and he asks, "How many times must I forgive someone who has sinned against me?" We understand why he has to ask. We also see how countercultural Jesus' answer is, both in that time and in this time. Peter asked Jesus, "If someone sins against me 7 times, how many times must I forgive them? As many as 7?" And Jesus says, "No, not 7, but 70 times 7." I mean, really an inconceivable number of times to forgive someone. Can you imagine your friend or your sibling, your brother or sister, or a relative who keeps doing the same thing that you've asked them not to do 77 times? At some point you get fed up with it, right? This is difficult. This is a difficult thing that Jesus is asking us to do. And Jesus knows it. And so he tells that bizarre parable, that difficult parable of the king. And the king calls his slaves to make an account of what they owe him. And a slave comes in who owes him 10,000 talents. And he can't pay. And so the king says, okay, we will sell him and his wife and his children and into slavery and all of his possessions so that I can at least get some of my money back. But the slave falls to his knees and he begs forgiveness. And the king has mercy on him and forgives him the debt. And he goes out, the slave who's been forgiven goes out and immediately runs into another slave that owes him money. He owes him 100 denarii. So we got 10,000 talents have been forgiven, and there's another slave that owes 100 denarii, and he refuses to forgive it and has that second slave thrown into prison, debtor's prison. And the king hears about it, and you heard the end. It doesn't turn out well for that first slave. But let's break this down, all right? A single talent, one talent is worth 6,000 denarii, all right? And a denarii is the wage given to a laborer for a single day's work. So to pay off one talent of debt, a day laborer would have to work 6,000 days, or 20 years at 6 days a week to pay off that debt. To pay off 10,000 talents, that same person would have to work 200,000 years. 10,000 talents is approximately, now this is based on today's price of silver, okay, of an ounce of silver. 10,000 talents is worth approximately $250 million. It's a lot of money. That's what the king forgave the first slave. And then that slave goes out. He must have been really important. I mean, how do you come to owe that much money, right? He had to have been a really important guy with really important responsibilities. And he goes out, and there's this other slave who owes him a measly 100 denarii. It's just so tiny compared to even one talent. One talent, 6,000 denarii, remember that. He owes him 100 denarii, 100 days' labor, and the slave who has been forgiven refuses to forgive that debt. These numbers are too big to even really comprehend the meaning of in everyday life. But that's what forgiveness feels like. It's so hard to do. Last week, Alice, my wife, came home and she had this beautiful book. And it's a collection of, it's an art book it's the complete works of Van Gogh. And it's a beautifully made book, and the pages are this nice, beautiful, thick paper, and all of the paintings are in there, and it's just fascinating to look through it. And I asked her, Alice, where did you get this book? And she said, well, someone was giving it away. And then she told the story of when she was given it, and the person giving it away said, handed it to Alice, and she looked at it and she said, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. Why are you giving this away? And the woman said, yeah, well, my ex cheated on me, so I'm giving away all his stuff. That's so satisfying, right? That's the way we think. You've all heard the story about the person who finds the Porsche for sale in the newspaper for $100, and it turns out it's a very valuable car, and it's the same situation, right? It's just so satisfying to get even when someone has hurt us. Now, I've been circling around the issue. When someone has truly wronged you, it feels big. It feels hard to let go of. That's why a 10,000 talent debt is not ridiculous if we're going to talk about the cost of forgiveness. Forgiveness is hard. So how do we let go of what feels like an insurmountable debt? Do we just give their stuff away? That probably felt good. But does it really help? Or what if you are the person who has wronged someone else, the person who needs and wants to be forgiven? What if you are the one with the debt? How do we earn the trust of someone we have harmed? in, I can't remember which book it was in, but in one of Brene Brown's books, she tells this story of her daughter's elementary school classroom. And the teacher in this classroom has a system where every time someone does something good and virtuous and helpful, they put a marble in a jar. And every time someone does something that breaks the rules or speaks out of turn or teases another child, anything that disrupts the order of the classroom, they take a marble out. And when the jar gets full, the class gets to have a party. So and then she tells the story of how the jar fills and how what things empty the jar. Now, what I love about this story of a jar full of marbles is that earning someone's trust takes time. And isn't that an important part, if not the central part of forgiveness, is to return to a relationship of trust? And we would love for it all to be done with one grand gesture, but the truth is, you can't just turn trust back on when it has been violated. It's very difficult to do that. The person earning the trust has to show a little bit at a time that they are worthy of trust. And the person who's trying to forgive has to trust them even just a little bit for the process to even get started. And so the marbles example, it shows us that it's a process, a little bit at a time. To restore trust in a relationship takes time, and we have to be willing to take a chance that we might be hurt again if we're going to forgive someone else and try and restore that relationship. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should let people back into our lives or back into relationship with us who have hurt and betrayed us in terrible ways. I'm talking about relationships that can and should be saved, not abusive or exploitive situations. So, wouldn't it be nice, though, if we could all just have a superpower? I mean, it works so well for the superheroes, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all just have the superpower of forgiveness? I forgive you. Done. No problem. And we return into relationship. I think that the superpower of forgiveness would be even better than flying or invisibility or super strength or you name it. And I wonder, what would Forgiveness Woman's costume look like? Would she have a cape? Probably not. We don't have superpowers. Instead of instant fixes and satisfying revenge, we're stuck doing the hard work of relationship. We're stuck earning trust again, one marble into the jar at a time. Jesus calls us to trust in a forgiving Father and to share that forgiveness with others. That's what happens in that story of the king and the slave. God forgives us before we are even worthy of forgiveness, like the king in the parable. God hopes that we will choose love and relationship over revenge and retribution. In a world where redemptive violence has been raised to an art form and is the subject of billion-dollar entertainment industries, where nations bomb each other, where people value the right to carry arms over the safety of children in schools, we have a really tough time going along with what Jesus suggests. Maybe we need to find our own equivalent of that jar of marbles from that classroom. What if we could look for ways to earn trust and offer trust little by little in our daily life? Pray for the person that cuts you off in traffic instead of cursing them. Be kind to the checker when the line was horribly long at the supermarket. Take a deep breath instead of snapping at someone. Look for the good in others, even when they annoy you, or when you have a difficult conversation to have. Say that beautiful little arrow prayer. May the Christ in me meet the Christ in thee.